I felt I always put the person before the player. I perhaps said that without really knowing what that meant, but an understanding of the support happens before a player even comes through your door. He could take himself out, grab a drink. And it was his way of, it was co-regulation really. It was collaborative with the coach and coaching the player himself, allowing that space to step out and come back in. But that was part of his routine within the session. Whereas he knew that was a rule within the session where he was allowed to take himself out for a moment to then reintegrate himself back in, which proved to be reasonably successful. A lot really comes down into the skill of a coach and their ability to plan a session that factors in some of these more psychological challenges. I understand if a boy or girl comes off the pitch and they've been taken off, understandably, if it's not been articulated to them, this is the reason why. I'd imagine that 99.9% of the time, the natural conclusion people draw to is, coach doesn't want me on the pitch anymore. I'm not impacting the game. I'm not playing well, and they draw their own connotations from that very quickly.
Hi there, how are you? I hope you've had a good week. Welcome to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, where today, football or soccer meets the brain. That's right, I'm your host, David Charlton, and over the next 8 weeks, we're going to dive into various different stories, different challenges, and contemporary issues in sports psychology and in the world of sport in general. In this case, we're going to look into how football coaches or soccer coaches can help neurodiverse players. Now, if you look at it, neurodiversity, it seems to be everywhere these days. Whether it's autism or ADHD, dyslexia or dyspraxia, it's talked about an awful lot. And there's many players and coaches in football or soccer that it does affect. But how well do we understand it? How can we create environments that embrace individual differences and allow people to thrive on and off the pitch? So whether you're a coach, a parent, a player, a decision maker, I'm hoping this episode is going to help you learn a little bit more about how you can make football or soccer more inclusive, or sport in general. So lace up your boots, open your mind, and listen along to this fascinating conversation that I had with my colleague, Adam Batstone. Adam and I have known each other for a number of years now, and he's got a big interest in football coaching and a background in football coaching, as well as we've got a mutual interest in supporting people, in this case youngsters, who are neurodivergent. The way this episode's going to work is Adam's going to talk a little bit about himself, and then we're going to go in and talk more about neurodiversity and how it impacts the players, the coaches, the different strategies to be able to help players as well as parents too. So Adam, do you want to go in there and just share a little bit more about yourself and your background, as I say, and where your interest in sports psychology came from?
I'm in my mid-30s now. It's probably a good place to start. So way back when I finished my sixth form studies, I was 17 or 18, always had a passion for football and coaching and playing football as well. Volunteered at a grassroots club, worked towards being involved in academy football, and like probably most coaches, initially start wanting to develop myself better to coach players technically and tactically. And as the years went by, noticed particularly within our academy setting, there were some boys that would reach a certain level that perhaps could have maybe on reflection have got to a higher level, or albeit they're still performing at a good level themselves anyway. And then other boys who were under the radar a little bit, technically and tactically maybe not as strong as their counterparts, however, stayed within the system, responded to adversity and responded to challenge perhaps a little bit better, which piqued my interest in everything sports psychology. So did my own little bits of reading around it, nothing academic in the initial stages, just engaging in social media posts and reading around it. And like I say, it really sparked an interest in me, and hence years down the line, eventually plucking up the courage and confidence, then take on a master's, which is a big body of work, and then a further accreditation. So it leads me sort of the present day now.
Currently your role, the club that you're involved in, is part coach, part like psychology professional, is that correct?
Up till very recently, yes. So from November, just gone, so November 24, my role became full-time on the psychology support. Prior to that, it was probably 18 months to 2 years worth of a hybrid role between coaching and psychology support. On paper, it sounds great where you can dip in and out of the coaching and the psych, but one role was always going to take a little bit more precedent, and it was the football coaching, rightly or wrongly. Being a football club, that was probably where I was more expectation. If whilst I was still employed as a football coach, I was being dragged into other training sessions. No issue with that, but I think that we, as a football club, and the plan was to always eventually make it a lot cleaner, where I've become apply all my resource to supporting players from a psychological standpoint. So from last 6 to 7 months or so, I've been fully integrated into my psych role, which I'm really, really enjoying.
Would you say your knowledge of psychology helps you as a coach?
A conversation quite recently I had, someone said, do I miss football coaching and doing the coaching side? And honestly, no, at this precise moment in time, I don't miss that. That's not to say in a week, months, or even a year's time, maybe I will start missing it. But I'm pretty confident that if I was to go back in to do any sort of coaching, I'd be a better coach now than I was, more through being more psychologically informed. I felt I always put the person before the player. But perhaps said that without really knowing what that meant, but an understanding of the support happens before a player even comes through your door. So the conversations you have with a parent, developing that rapport, if you like, for a parent where they feel comfortable to disclose their son's had a bad day at school, or certain, just where they feel comfortable to share. You're not a threat to them if they do share, and they're not feeling like they're overindulging information or disclosing too much information to you. Felt like that all-round psychological support, it just helps you become a better practitioner, whether that is as a psychological practitioner or whether that's as a coach. So it's definitely made me a better practitioner on the whole, and I think it would make me a better football coach if I was to try my hand at it once again.
When you say there about the parents there and divulging information, would you say, when you look back, can that be quite tricky for some parents with a coach? Does fear play a part, do you think?
I think trying to empathise or sympathise, whatever the word may be, with regards to a parent, particularly if they're new to the academy environment. So we might have some boys who've had a trial or experienced life at another academy, so they've got an idea of what academy life is like, although one club is not necessarily completely the same as another club with regards to their processes. But for many parents, and perhaps the children as well, their boy or girl, if it's a female academy going into that environment, that might be at this point the pinnacle of their achievements in a football space. So wanting to, I imagine, and I get the impression sometimes parents may second guess, or should we tell the coaches this? Will this information be used against them? Will this be a roadblock as a blockade to further opportunity? And that this is, I wouldn't say this is purely just my own bias and me drawing my own conclusions. I think parents have disclosed this in the past to me as well, where they do worry about certain issues or certain challenges their children have on a day-to-day basis, as to whether that may or may not cause any issue with regards to them having further opportunity. So I do think there is that, whether fear is the right word, but perhaps sometimes a reluctance to share. I do think there is an element of that. And when I say an element, it's enough for me to think, actually, there's probably more work that we could do, particularly with parents in this space.
I suppose when I mentioned fear, that might be at the heart of it, where fear that it's going to impact, as you say, on potential opportunities with their son or daughter. You've got the whole, let's face it, the coach picks the team and selection comes into it, and there's so many facets to it. So you touched on the fact that you try to put the person before the player, which takes us nicely on to this piece about neurodiversity. So I'm intrigued. You've supported players who've got a neurodiverse background there, and what types of challenges have they I suppose, brought to you as a coach, as a psychologist?
One of the first examples I can remember, and it's been a fairly common example now when I think from when I was first presented this to where I am now, but also when I think retrospectively without my awareness as to why certain children may have behaved a certain way, was sometimes an inattentiveness. So for instance, you are a coach, try and set the scene and paint the picture of you're a coach, you're on your football pitch. Imagine it's the same for a number of academies and grassroots clubs as well, where you're sharing pitch space. So we've got an indoor AstroTurf, which might be divided into quarters, and you've got 4 different age groups on each quarter. So there's a lot of noise going around, a lot of potential distraction, and you've got 1 or 2 children who, and I can think present day back 10 years ago, where you've got some boys, they're looking around, their attention seems to be elsewhere. And you might be delivering that information through just verbal instruction. You might have the tactics board out. You might be demonstrating, but for whatever reason, they're not particularly engaged. And that was my first sort of taste into working with neurodivergent children, really, without realizing perhaps they were even neurodivergent at this point. It was probably a word that wasn't even on my radar. Was back even as recent as 5-6 years ago, it was probably not a word within my vocabulary.
On that score, then, would you say that, and this could be coaches, this honestly could be teachers, it could just be people in general, where we can be guilty sometimes in that type of situation where we get into judgment mode, I would call it, where the child isn't paying attention, and straight away we form an opinion on them that maybe they don't want it, or the motivations question and various different things like that. Do you think that, I don't know, have you come across that?
Yeah, well, this is sort of probably going around the houses and sort of making this point, but I remember at school where certain children in our class were effectively dismissed as they're just not a very good learner, they're disruptive. But then looking back, they were disruptive in certain lessons and certain environments. And so there was a couple of examples I can think of within the football club I work at, where certain sessions that perhaps didn't involve a goal, so an opportunity to score, or certain sessions where there was greater than 8 players in particular in the session. So the turnover time, in terms of being able to have a go at doing a shot at goal or whatever it might be, maybe sometimes actually smaller sessions were more engaging. So then all of a sudden that inattentiveness goes by the wayside a little bit, and a little bit more attentive. You've also got some children who are very hyperactive. So again, it's those sessions where there's a little bit of idle waiting time, but their hyperactivity is directed towards kicking a ball around or not being task oriented at that specific moment in time. So a lot really comes down into the skill of a coach and their ability to plan a session that factors in some of these more psychological challenges, because there's, without a doubt, a lot of time and resource goes into developing players on a technical and tactical level, like I alluded to. But the technical and tactical work will go by the wayside if we haven't engaged and put the participation of the players and the boys involved first. If it's geared towards their progression, which rightly so, but we don't tap into that participation in terms of what makes this certain individual tick, what sessions do they like, how do they respond to for example, I can think of if someone is losing track or losing focus, is little cues or little prompts to redirect them. A simple question: "Oh, you're listening?" Just the tone of voice. It's non-confrontational. It's not aggressive. There's no sort of ego attached to it, I'd say. I mean, I want them to listen to me, but it's not coming from a place where I'm stopping the whole session and humiliating them. It's just a little gentle prompt, a little gentle nudge, just to redirect them back on track again. So yeah, there are those challenges, but I think that's the skill of a practitioner or skill of a coach to recognize those triggers and gently sort of coax them back into where we want their focus to be oriented towards.
I'm going to try and summarize some of that. So in some ways, I think what we're trying to say is some children, or could be adults for that matter, will get overstimulated by perhaps the environment and the way things are set up, and it could well be we've got to factor in as well what's happening at home and various different things that have gone on in their day. And as a coach or a practitioner, I suppose asking ourselves why this is happening is important. And then obviously if we're looking just to keep this as simple as possible, then it's, well, okay, why is this happening? And then how do I solve this? What solutions can I bring to be able to help this child?
Yeah, I think it's a great summary. And you'll try little strategies, interventions, whichever word you want to use, and some will work and some won't. And it's very, I mean, particularly in my case, it's been very much trial and error. I did a lot of reading and studying around neurodiversity as just a general scope of what neurodiversity is. More so because I felt at the time it was something that I needed to do because it was evident, and was working with children who were presenting some neurodiverse conditions in terms of their behaviours and you know their actions. So because of that, we did a lot of reading around it and thought, well, how can we best support? Listen to podcasts, probably much like a lot of other coaches and trainee sports psychs will do. So I wasn't doing anything too different to what many others would be doing. But I was in a situation where I didn't feel like I was coming through an area of expertise necessarily. I was trialing and error certain things, keeping parents in the loop as the strongest attachment figures. So then the message from me was being reinforced by parents. Again, it largely comes down to the rapport you've got with the parents. If you've developed a sense of trust and there's an open communication back and forth, then I would always get often messages from parents, so-and-so's not had a great day today, just keep an eye out for this, or oh, so-and-so's had a great day today, and in which case you come from a position of strength when they arrive and you say, oh, I've heard you've had a fantastic day at school, or you got something as simple as a sticker for your good work in maths, and just building up that rapport again. Yeah, that relationship building, which I think's, you know, key in any sort of psychological therapeutic alliance between client and practitioner or player coach. That rapport and alliance is so key. That it's no different in this, really, working with a neurodiverse child versus a neurotypical child.
Yeah, no, makes an awful lot of sense. That does. My background, I'll have worked when I was doing the training to be a sports psychologist, and then even at the very start of being qualified, I'll have worked with people on the autistic spectrum for who it'll have been for about 6 or 7 years in a slightly different role away from sport. And I remember often a lot of the challenges that I encountered along the way were eye contact was one thing, or well, lack of eye contact. There was the routine was a huge thing, whereby I remember the role I had was with university students at the time. And obviously university, you've got semester 1 in the UK is from September, October through till December. They'll have a break at Christmas. Then you've got semester 2, January through to Easter time, another break, and then you've got a smaller summer semester. And yeah, I'd noticed for the first few weeks of each of the semesters, they found it really, really difficult adjusting to new things there. And I mean, not everybody is the same. They have various different traits. But yeah, I'm just curious, have you come across those type of things in your environment, and how would you deal with it?
It's fortunate, actually. There's a school not too far from me, which cater for children who neurodiverse children. So a lot of the children there haven't been able to fit into mainstream school, found it difficult, haven't been able to thrive in mainstream school, even if they may be able to cope on occasions. And the study visit I did, it welcomed me in. I sat in a few lessons, and one of the most profound things they did was rather than like a mainstream school, like, I would have attended where you have 1 hour of maths, 1 hour of English. If the children weren't as engaged, particularly, they moved on. They were a lot more fluid. So there was routine in a sense that, by routine, I mean, if the children felt they weren't getting too much from the particular, or the class teacher felt the children weren't getting too much from the particular session, it wasn't engaging for them. They moved on. Everyone sort of knew that it wasn't a case of fighting the next 15 minutes waiting for the school bell to then go to the next lesson. It was actually, we need to adapt and adjust and move on to the next session. So that was that sort of, how would I describe it? That sort of boundary was in place where it was quite flexible. But what they did, they pre-framed every lesson with, we're now doing a session of maths and we're going to be working on our times tables. So it was framed up. So I brought that into my coaching at the time, where, and we were encouraged to do that anyway as coaches, irrespective of what the session is and who the attendees are in the session. Frame up the session, explain what it is, but actually I tried to adapt that bit of flexibility in with it as well. Whereas it's very difficult sometimes, coach, to remove the ego where you want to work on a particular skill, tactic, whatever it may be, and then to keep working on that until you feel, they've got it, and they've got it on repeat. Sometimes having to park that and embrace a bit of chaos and go, we've lost them a little bit. It's that little bit of having that little bit of the reading the room, I guess, is the best way to describe it. Just, you know what, we're losing them a little bit here. Let's move on, and maybe come back to that as well. I think in the educational space, it's called it interleaving. I think where I may be wrong, but where you do a little bit of something and then actually, no, we're losing them a bit here. We'll step out and come back into it again. So it's kind of like having a bit of a flavour of what the session needs. And reading the room is probably the best way to describe it. But providing that routine was important, particularly for some of there's a couple of boys I can think of that particularly helped them explaining what the routine was and how a session looks. And I can think of one example where if a certain boy did feel overwhelmed, we'd happily let him leave the training session. And by leave the training session, that was a safe space, just on the outside of the actual perimeter of the session. He could take himself out, grab a drink, and it was his way of, it was co-regulation really. It was collaborative with the coach and coaching the player himself, allowing that space to step out and come back in. But that was part of his routine within the session, whereas he knew that was a rule within the session where he was allowed to take himself out for a moment to then reintegrate himself back in, which proved to be reasonably successful.
And again, I suppose that links with the overstimulation, doesn't it? It's just to help things settle, and then for him to be able to reacquaint himself in the environment. Yeah, I know through my private work with various different young footballers, how one thing, it's a bit different in the academy space to grassroots, but one thing I've come across is where a child will be substituted, and it might just be they're taken off for 5 or 10 minutes or so, and then they're integrated back onto the pitch. And the few cases in particular were that the child would frame that them being taken off as a weakness, essentially. And my role was to try and help them actually recognise, and the parent recognise, that this actually is a positive thing. You going off for 5 or 10 minutes means you can actually help your team better to win the game. You can come back a better player. That's really difficult. You've mentioned the word ego a few times, and I mean, football can be quite a masculine, egotistical type of place, can't it? Where weakness is like blown up, if you like, and being able to recognise that is so important.
It's interesting you made the point about reframing the substitute, or being removed from the play to then come back and affect the game a little bit later to regulate themselves. And I understand if a boy or a girl comes off the pitch and they've been taken off, understandably, if it's not been articulated to them, this is the reason why. I'd imagine that 99.9% of the time, the natural conclusion people draw to is, coach doesn't want me on the pitch anymore. I'm not impacting the game. I'm not playing well, and they draw their own connotations from that very quickly. Also, it was around ego, I'd be remiss to say I wasn't egotistical when I was a part-time coach, because I felt the best chance for me to become a full-time coach within the academy was my teams to be playing very, very well and winning games. And if we weren't playing well and winning games, I would be more likely to get frustrated and angry. Or when I say angry, I directed it at myself. There's no sort of outward outbursts at players, but I'd get very annoyed with myself, very, very frustrated, and it'd eat me up. I remember there were times where I'd get home and have to go for a long walk before I faced anyone because I was just in a bit of a foul mood. And laughable when you think about it, because at the time it was 13, 14-year-old children playing football. And I think, why am I, at the time, a 30-something man getting so frustrated with it? But we carry those emotions in. With football, a very emotional game. When I became full-time, it changed a lot, because I realized my job isn't, I'm at where I wanted to be. My job isn't dependent on results. My job is dependent on developing individuals. And if individuals within my care have improved, become better technically, better tactically on a football level, but also, you know what, if they don't progress as far as they may have wished to have done as a footballer, they've got some key life skills. And it's just as, and I mean this with you really do mean it with every respect, if there's ever a boy who hasn't quite fulfilled their ambitions as a footballer, and I've seen a few where we're fortunate with Coventry, I've had a couple of Wembley visits over the last couple of years where I've been able to see certain boys at Wembley and catch up with them, and they're in their early 20s now, and they've got some good jobs, they're doing well, they've got university degrees, and they've been equipped with hopefully those skills, where sitting in a retention meeting at the end of the season and having a tough, difficult conversation with a coach, or going into that meeting not knowing their skills, that have to have a job interview or kind of sell themselves in front of a head of faculty at a university for the one they want to get into, and have an interview that way, is their life skills that set them up for that as well. So they're just as pleasing when you see those moments as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. I suppose you hear on something there where essentially as a sports psych, when you are working with like individuals, be it, we stick with youngsters, you might well be try to improve their performance on the pitch, but yeah, essentially that's what we're doing, aren't we? We are teaching them life skills through the vehicle of the sport, often because they're so transferable to education, to the workplace, and so on. The other point as well there would be how it's amazing in sport how, whether you're a player or whether you're a coach, how your identity can really get wrapped up around performance and what success and how much that can eat you up emotionally and play such a huge part in the way you go about your business.
Yeah, and those life skills become even more important then, and that reflection on who they identify themselves as not just Johnny the footballer, but actually he can be excelling in maths. If he's not going to make it or be a footballer, there's other lines of work he's potentially got his eyes on that he can go into. He's identified the lessons and subjects he wants to pick and the university he may want to attend. But also we frame up to a lot of the boys, at some point the journey comes to an end, whether that's you as a 15-year-old at this football club or you as a 35-year-old at this football club. And unless you've made massive amounts of money, you are going to have to go into a job that as mere mortals do, where we have to work, but get into an office and maybe work. As it's not all just being out on the football pitch and kicking a ball around. Eventually there are certain skills you've got to acquire to go into the big bad world of work.
That's interesting. It's probably a good way to start to wrap this all up, because one thing I've noticed is when we're talking about neurodiversity, how the expectation level of the young person can be maybe a little bit out of sync and unrealistic on occasions, and how the words can be discussed in football. I suppose words like commitment and drive and motivation and all this are talked about an awful lot, and passion, things like that. I mean, kids in general can I suppose generalize when it comes down to these type of words, but possibly the neurodivergent person will even pick up on those words even more so, and they can have a very different like expectation to the coach or the practitioner. Is that fair? Have you come across that?
Yeah, and I think we're living in also different eras. So the coach who's a 30-something year old will have a view of what those words mean to them, and the child of a 8, 9, 10, 11 up to 16 will have their own version of what that word looks like, and attach certain actions and behaviors. And I think sometimes we have a bit of recency bias as well, where as an adult we might remember clearly back to what commitment looked like for us as a 17 and 18-year-old. So even though we're trying to empathize and put our feet in the shoes of this young player, we still got that what we look like in our 17, 18 and early 20s, as opposed to what we were saying and what we were doing and how we were acting in certain situations, in training sessions or whatever it might be when we were 11 and 12. So I don't know if I've articulated that point particularly well, but point being that being able to get a shared understanding of what those words really mean, and not just what they mean but how they look in practice, is often a good place to start from. And if we have those sit down conversations, so using that word commitment, I liked how you were committed to using your left foot in that shooting practice. If they're right footed, there's still that feeling of developing some self-efficacy in that boy, where their left foot shooting might require a lot of work, but by identifying some positives, there's something to anchor ourselves to, where we can say, oh, do you remember last week when you could barely hit the target with your left foot, and now look at this saves this keeper's having to make. So indirectly we're praising the goalkeeper, but also reinforcing that that mastery mindset of developing those techniques, and it's not so attributed to outcome, because I think there's been occasions where a lot of boys, irrespective of being neurodiverse or neurotypical, very attached to outcomes. You have conversations, and 90% at the start of the season, when we're discussing their season journey and what they might want to achieve, it's want to score X amount of goals, get X amount of assists, X amount of clean sheets. I mean, that's fantastic. But what are the processes that are going to help you get there? If you could shoot a little bit better with your left foot, like you can do with your right foot, will that increase the likelihood of scoring more goals? And again, it's a long-term process, like many things. And I don't think this is too different, but as a practitioner or coach, psychologist, and whatever your role may be, is understanding that it's a process that requires checking in with on a regular basis, and no one conversation or no one training session will fix the world or make a big step. It's lots of little and often, and developing good habits, and that's good habits physically, whether they're actually striking with the ball with their left foot, or good habits from a mentality point of view of attempting to strike the ball with their left foot, and just reinforcing those habits positively when they do happen and when we do see them. Someone probably wraps it up nicely. Someone on a recent course summarized it brilliantly, where it's catching them in rather than catching them out. Too often we're too keen to catch people out. Oh, what are you doing that for? Why didn't you do this? Should have shot that one with your left foot. Well, actually, oh, well done for having a go with your left foot. I'm really pleased with your effort. Sometimes it might sound fluffy, but the way we say it, the tone we say it, whether it's done in a group, or some boys might prefer a one-to-one conversation, grabbing them at the end of the training session to tell them, oh, you know what, really pleased with the work you've done on your left foot, as an example, is a good way of reinforcing those and developing those good habits.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think what I'm picking up on there is just the real importance of good, effective communication there, whether you're a practitioner or a coach there with the young person, or the neurodiverse young person. Because we're thinking about young people in general, that their communication skills at a young age aren't the best. So that really does put the onus more so on the adult who's working with them. And then I think the other bit I picked up on, you talked about what self-esteem you may have mentioned there, self-worth. It's important to point out that, we've all got a negative bias, and if we're if we think about the neurodiversity bit here, if we're not clear with when we're talking to the youngster, we're not communicating effectively, then there is that potential that the youngster may pick up things in the wrong way, not be the best communicator, and then that can impact on how they feel about themselves and their mental health to a degree. So I think that's all got to be sort of factored in. Is that fair?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think so. And also appreciating what our reaction might be like to what their action is. I've seen children react angrily to, again, my perception, something very small, but who am I to say it's so small, because I'm not living the life of that child, and I'm not being scrutinized and judged after every training session, having a written comment at the end of the week. It's that sort of goldfish bowl syndrome where they're in the middle and or there's all these eyes looking in. The context that helps us all do our jobs better. So sometimes when we appreciate the challenge that they're under, and they're still only children, their threshold for dealing with mistakes is probably considerably less than as adults. When they do react, kick cones, kick football posts, shout, scream obscenities, is actually sometimes the reaction from us as adults. We've also got to try and co-regulate them and not do anything that then necessarily berates them straight away to then pour more fuel on the fire. Is, again, that's a massive skill set of a coach and practitioner, and that'd be absolutely my advice. If and I'm not necessarily singing to the choir here, but with regards to coaches, is if they can get any sort of psychological training, it doesn't necessarily have to be a master's degree or any massively formal forms of accreditation, but being slightly more better versed in child psychology, and particularly when working with children, what reactions to mistakes may look like, just might them help be a little bit more informed with regards to when certain outbursts, for lack of a better phrase, happen, or certain flashpoints in sessions occur, to be better equipped to co-manage them, because that's what it is working with, not working against, not anything else. Just try and work with that child to navigate lots of tricky little situations that present themselves in training sessions, but also just in life in general.
Yeah, that makes sense. We'll look to wrap up. But I think what I pick from your last point there would be how self-awareness is critical, and really, if we think about it from a football coaching point of view, really when you're trying to build good decision makers on the pitch and change their technique and tactically make them more aware, you're building self-awareness, aren't you, to make them perform better on the pitch. And this is no different in this respect. By learning about the different facets, you're becoming more aware about them, which makes you a better coach, and so on and so forth. So yeah, to wrap all of this up then, Adam, are you able to break this down into 3 key takeaways for the audience?
One immediately straight off the bat would be to really consider, and it's probably more so for football coaches than maybe sports psychs, but maybe still applicable, is to really factor in the psychological planning with regards to your training sessions. So, for instance, if it's a playing out from the back session, might be working on passing and receiving techniques. That's brilliant. Working on the roles and responsibilities of different positions within how can we play out from the back more effectively? Brilliant. Then also from an individual lens and perspective, how engaging is the session? Is there lots of waiting around? Because sometimes it could be quite slow, methodical, and very coach led. That can be fine, but is it going to work for the individuals within the session? What are some of the challenges that may be presented by certain individuals when they see that session set up, and almost trying to put yourself in the shoes of the boys or girls that you're coaching. So when they do arrive, what are they going to think when they first arrive? Are you going to have to start quite fast paced to get engagement and get the excitement and get the adrenaline going? Or are you going to have to, or is it a session which is quite highly intense and quite competitive, where again, there's going to be certain flashpoints if you give a bad decision? So a lot of factors to factor in with regards to what sort of responses might you be expecting on an emotional level from your players, not necessarily just technical and tactical. And dealing with technical and tactical mistakes is actually co-regulating emotions within sessions. I think it's massive. And if I was doing a session in the next hour, that'll be at the forefront of my planning. So that'll be one in a not so much of a small nutshell, but that's one. Second, again, working with children, but be an ally with parents. It's not a case of I'm the coach and involve parents, get parents involved. It's not that they have to know everything, but develop good relationships with parents, be a presence. Because I think once you do that, you get a real good buy-in, that sort of triangulation where if you've got at the top of that triangle the individual, the boy or the girl, the player, and there's a message from the coach being reinforced by the parent, and there's two sides of it feeding in, I think that's really powerful. So there's two. Probably more privileged in the academy environment, perhaps, where we have more than one coach per session, is utilize the resource you have. So one of you can be leading and driving the session and focus on the technical and tactical aims and outcomes, the physical aims and outcomes you want to achieve. If you've got another person, particularly if you've got neurodiverse children in your session, there might be times where your spare coach, the coach you're working with, can take them off and do some one-to-one work, and that addresses that inattentiveness. If they're not attentive in a big group setting, it might be 10 minutes they need outside of that environment. You're still in the same session, you're still in the same parameters, but maybe they're at the other end of the pitch and they're working on any technique, but it's more one-to-one focus. So again, something that's probably our best intervention that we've had. We're working with some really close coaches I've got, and not just coaches, friends of mine, where we've got them together, and actually whoever it is, you could just go and take this group of players over and work on some left foot finishing. Really, the design of that particular practice might not be to work on a left foot finishing. It's just to get a particular individual out of the firing line of emotions. If you're doing a competitive game or a competitive session, the scores are close, sometimes it takes them out the emotional cauldron, so to speak.
Yeah, it's amazing actually, just by doing a little task like that, as you say, for a few minutes, that can just settle them down, and then you can always bring them back in, can't you?
Absolutely, and they're still involved. They're not ostracized, they're not removed, and there isn't this big hoo-ha made over them kicking a few cones or just teetering on the edge. And we're talking about these young boys. I can think of players in the Premier League who played on the edge, and Wayne Rooney being one of them, where he was either scoring worldy goals or getting himself sent off most of the time when he was on the edge, but that's when he was at his best. And listen, if it's all right for him as a world-class player in his day, then it's definitely all right for 9 and 10-year-olds up and down the country to show a bit of emotion and play on the edge every now and again.
As you say, yeah, there'll be lots of players in the Premier League now as well, who play their best football when they're showing emotion, essentially. So yeah, most definitely got to work with it, as opposed to just shutting it out and making it a big negative. So yeah, look, Adam, really enjoyed the conversation. Lots of advice, tips, tricks, strategies there. It's, been fascinating. So yeah, a big thank you. Well, that was really good fun. I really enjoyed that conversation with Adam. It seems more and more young people today are being identified as neurodivergent, and not necessarily because it's becoming more common, but because there's more awareness. And I guess podcast episodes like this add further awareness too, and they can go on to help people and share that understanding. Diagnostic tools, well, they've improved massively, and alongside articles and information like this, it really does help people understand that a little bit more, which is what it's all about. And then also you've got society. Well, people, they're becoming more and more open to discussing mental health and cognitive differences, which goes on to encourage earlier assessment and support. And what I'm finding in a sporting context, we're getting an increasing number of inquiries from adults and from parents of children who talk openly about neurodiversity and how it goes on to influence their experience as a whole and their sporting experience. You could argue it's a hot topic today, and I really do hope that Adam's insights and my words of wisdom have helped you. I'd be keen to know some of your experiences too. Feel free to get in touch. Email me at info@sport-excellence sporthyphenexcellence.co.uk. I think it's really, really important to keep that conversation flowing. We want as many people to have positive experience from their sport, from their football, and from their soccer. So in this case, we talked an awful lot about youngsters and youth development. It can be a real asset to be open-minded, to be talking about these things, to be looking for solutions, not just blaming and shaming, and giving them the fear treatment to get the best out of them. So yeah, be open-minded, listen, learn. And until next week, where you'll have some more learnings potentially, and where I'm joined by a fantastic guest, I hope you have a great week. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.